Four dogs from the 2024-25 Big East champion St. John's basketball team are all set to try and live their dreams and try and make a roster spot with their NBA teams in the Summer League. That action's already kicked off. Zach Braziller is always on top of all things Red Storm and is on now to talk about some of these players right here. Zach, we got R.J. Lewis Jr. with the Utah Jazz, Kadary Richmond with the Wizards, Darren Scott with the Celtics, and Devion Smith with the Hawks. R.J. Lewis didn't play in the Jazz's first game, and he's going to be out again tonight with some knee soreness, I guess. And the Wizards don't play until Sunday, so we won't see Richmond. But what do you think are these guys' chances to stick with this team and make the roster or even play in the G League?
Yeah, I think look, RJ and Kadari are gonna be, have a good, they have two-way contracts, so they're gonna get chances, especially in the G League where they're gonna have to make their bones and prove on some of their deficiencies. With Kadari, it's obviously his three-point shooting. With RJ, it's decision making, it's making more shots. It's kind of being more of a secondary scorer slash playmaker. He's not going to have the ball in his hands as much. But yeah, both guys are, I would expect to make it through training camp. You get two ways teams value you. Those teams don't just give those two-way contracts away. I'm going to be very interested to watch Kadari in summer league. When I talked to him before the draft, he spoke a lot about kind of reworking that jump shot. And look, with Kadari, that's really the only thing that he's missing. He does everything so well. He's a good defender. He can run a team. Rebounds well for a guard. He's 6'6". He teams like him. It's just that shot is just kind of is what prevented him, to this point. I mean, look, if Kadari was a passable three-point shooter, he'd be in the NBA already. He would have never even been at St. John's. The shot is what's held him back, and I'll be interested to see in the G, in the summer league, to see that new shot, how it looks. And then RJ, we'll see. Look, the Jazz are now in the California part of summer league. They still go to Vegas. Everyone goes to Vegas, so he's going to get. You would think, the fact they're just going soreness doesn't sound like it's a major thing. You would think he'll get some reps and get some opportunities. But for both of these guys, it's going to be the G League. It's going to be, having to prove themselves. And, like what Danis Jenkins did this past year. Danis Jenkins, who was, the star point guard at St. John's, Rick Pitino's first season, he was an all rookie team player on the G League. And sounds like he'll be back with the Pistons. He's, that's part of it. You got to kind of prove what you can do at this level against professionals. College is one thing, but for these guys who don't get drafted, you have to kind of work your way up. And look, it happens. You look at Julian Champagny, the St. John's star from a few years back. He now has he didn't get drafted. He did the G League thing, and he's wound up with the Spurs, and I think he's got around a $3 million guaranteed contract for next season. And he played in all 82 games this past year. You see plenty of success stories of guys who don't get drafted and work their way through the G League. The key is work, because there are not a lot of spots out there, and so many of these guys are so talented, and the guys who work the most usually the ones who make it.
Well, RJ is the guy who bet on himself. Only signed a two-way deal with the Jazz. When you look at the Jazz's roster right now, do you look at it and be like, okay, this kid maybe should have stayed one more year in college?
I can see both ways. I understand why he didn't stay. He's going to be 23. He's coming off a great season. He's thinking, I talked to him before the draft. He's thinking he didn't see how that much would change for him after another year in college. We all know he wasn't coming back to St. John's. Yeah, the fit with Utah, I could see your point. Look, they drafted Ace Bailey with the top 5 pick. He plays the same position as RJ. Um, so it was kind of a little surprise that that's where he went. But look, the Jazz are a team in transition. They're not, they're coming off obviously a really bad season. There might be opportunities there for RJ as we go through the year, so but yeah, look, he definitely lost money. There's no question about that. If he went back to college, I'm sure he could have gotten somewhere 2 to 3 million. and the two-way deals are, like a little south of 600,000, but you also have to consider, the age. And some guys are just, he was ready to start his pro career. And he said like that was his plan his sophomore year, and it didn't work because of injuries, but um, he was ready. And, you know, credit to him, you wish him luck that, he was ready to start this journey, and he went for it. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I'm never going to get on a player for betting on themselves, but ooh, that's a big money drop off right there when we talk
It
about
is.
the difference in paychecks. But hey, is what it is. The man bet on himself. When we talk Aaron Scott and Devion Smith, they only sign summer league contracts. Which one of these guys, if not both, do you think can catch on?
Yeah, I know teams like Darren Scott a lot. He's got length at on the wing. He can shoot. I know he didn't have a great year shooting the ball at St. John's, but he can shoot. He's obviously that 3-and-D type guy that teams like. Um, he's an incredibly tough guy, high character guy. Um, you know, I I think he's got a very good chance to be in training camp with someone. And but the flip side is for guys like him and for him and Davon is um what are you looking for? They're going to make more money overseas than they probably would by going to camp and being a G League guy who's not who's not really attached to a team on a two-way. Now, if one of them plays really well in summer league, maybe you get that two-way and that obviously changes things. But if you're not on a two-way, might make more sense to go overseas. Being overseas is a really good career. A lot of those former St. John's players under Steve Lavin went that route. D'Angelo Harrison, Phil Green, Sir Dominic Pointer, who had a cup of coffee in the NBA and have made really good money overseas. Everything is paid for, housing, food. You're treated great. You obviously got to go to the right spot, but I look at both Aaron Scott and Davon Smith as guys that can have really, really, really good overseas careers. Now, does that mean they can't play in the NBA? No, of course it doesn't. I just think if you're not going to be able to get a two-way, it's the smarter move probably is to go overseas. But both will have opportunities here in summer league. That's the thing with summer league now. The top guys, the high first round picks, they don't usually play more than a few games. So it gives guys a chance to put stuff on film, whether it's for the organization they're representing in summer league or for someone else, and it gives you a chance to open eyes. That's the thing. Everyone when they talk about summer league, they always look, the big guys. Oh, I want to watch Cooper Flagg, or a few years ago, I want to watch Wembayama or Scoot Henderson or whoever it is. But that's how some of these guys catch on, is the maybe the undrafted guys who really put on a show in summer league and maybe show teams something that they didn't see.
All right, Zach Braziller, thanks for hopping on with us, man.
My pleasure.